The Senate and the House will also need to pass a continuing resolution that would keep the government funded past September 30th. Negotiations continue on that as well. Live now to the floor of the U.S. Senate here on C-SPAN 2.
The Senate will come to order. Today's opening prayer will be offered by Reverend Kenneth Kalabas, pastor of St. Joseph's Church in Raritan, New Jersey.
Let us pray. Dear Lord in heaven, you bless the creation of this great nation of women and men today, and I ask for the continuance of your support and guidance of the women and men of the United States Senate. Bless them with the wisdom necessary to make tough decisions concerning our nation and its well-being. Guide them towards keeping our nation strong, free, and generous. Help them to use their talents and gifts to benefit our nation and come to the aid of those in need. May they be the best of teachers as role models for the future generations of our country. Please bless them with good health and the ability to do the work that is brought before them. Amen.
Please join me in reciting the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. The clerk will read a communication to the Senate.
Washington, D.C., September 19, 2013. To the Senate, under the provisions of Rule 1, Paragraph 3 of the Standing Rules of the Senate, I hereby appoint the Honorable Brian Schatz, a Senator from the state of Hawaii, to perform the duties of the Chair. Signed, Patrick J. Leahy, President pro tempore.
Mr. President,
Majority Leader.
I would yield to the junior senator from New Jersey to speak about the chaplain today.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator from New Jersey.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise today to recognize my pastor, Father Ken Kalabas, who's joining us here in Washington today. I'm honored and delighted that Father Ken Kalabas, the pastor of St. Joseph's Church in Raritan, New Jersey, is serving as our guest chaplain today. Father Ken is the pastor and spiritual leader of the people of St. Joseph's and for the larger community. Father Ken began his working career as a small businessman in New Jersey. When he was just 23 years old, he opened Ken's Flowers and Gifts in Carteret, New Jersey. He quickly became a respected leader of the business community and someone that everyone could depend upon. But Father Ken later received and answered the call to the ministry, and he now dedicates his life to our spiritual growth. His commitment and generosity to the members of our parish is unwavering, and his door is always open to anyone who seeks his guidance. The Church of St. Joseph's is nearing the conclusion of its year-long celebration of its 100th anniversary. We are fortunate at St. Joseph's to have Father Ken as our pastor and our leader, and I'm proud to have him as our guest chaplain today. Thank you, Mr. President.
Majority Leader.
Following my remarks, the Senate will be in a period of morning business. The majority will control the first 30 minutes. The Republicans, the second 30 minutes. Following that morning business, we'll resume consideration of S. 1392. Mr. President, it was about 5 decades ago, Vice President Humphrey predicted it was possible to eradicate poverty in America. In fact, this is what he said, and I quote, "We can banish hunger from the face of the earth." Close quote. That was 1965. Today, in 2013, there are more than 50 million people living in the United States, including 150,000 families in Nevada. who don't know where the next meal will come from. In the richest country in the world, 1 in 6 are in danger of going to bed hungry tonight. And half of those people are children. But despite these sobering numbers and despite these difficult economic times, House Republicans have turned their backs on American families struggling to put food on the table. It's true the bill being considered in the House of Representatives today would save $40 billion. But how would it save that $40 billion? By snatching food out of the hands of millions of the neediest children and their families. Why are there people on food stamps? We have tried to create a safety net, Mr. President, so these people have at least the basics of being able to have a meal during the day. House Republicans are determined to gut the nutrition assistance programs in the name of austerity, even though 9 out of 10 recipients are families with children, senior citizens, or people with disabilities. And these needy Americans aren't exactly living a life of excess on the government's dime. They get about $4 in food assistance each day. And, Mr. President, one of my favorite things I really like to do in Nevada and here in Washington is go grocery shopping. It's such a diversion for me. I love going grocery shopping, to look around, buy the things. You know, Landra and I are without our children and our grandchildren. We live alone, but we still buy food, and I enjoy that so very, very much. So I have a good idea how much $4 will buy, or $4.50 to be specific. That's enough money to buy, if you're lucky, a pound of hamburger. And, you know, they have different grades of hamburger. They have expensive kind, not so expensive, and then the cheaper kind. Even the cheaper kind, you couldn't buy a pound of that most of the time. A gallon of milk, about $4. So you couldn't buy them both the same day. Certainly you couldn't buy hamburger and milk on the same day. It's possible to make important reforms to both farm and food stamp programs without balancing the budget on the backs of people who are hungry. But instead of cutting waste and eliminating fraud, the House Republicans will cut lunches for 210,000 children and will eliminate food assistance for 170,000 veterans. There's another way. It was done here in the Senate under the direction of Chairwoman Stabenow. The bipartisan Senate Agriculture Bill passed under her direction and the ranking member, and it saves $23 billion without forcing needy children to skip meals. In our farm bill, it does it fairly. And if it came to the House of Representatives floor, it would pass overwhelmingly. But you know what, Mr. President? The Republican leadership won't let Democrats vote. That's why they'll probably pass this very, very mean-spirited piece of legislation today, because only Republicans will be allowed to vote on it. House Republican leadership refuses to consider any bill that can garner votes from both parties. Leave it to the House of Representatives to take the hard way whenever possible. These same reckless Republicans are also determined to take the uphill route to passing a CR, continuing resolution. What does that do? It funds the government. Instead of doing what's necessary to keep the economy on firm footing, Republicans are obsessed with denying and undermining the law of the land, Obamacare. Remember, Mr. President, law passed about 4 years ago. Supreme Court declared it constitutional. The many good things are already working to keep people who are sick from declaring bankruptcy. It's a good piece of legislation that will make America like all modern nations and have health care for everybody, with rare exception. But watching the Republican Party self-destruct, and that's not coming from me, that's what pundits are saying all over the country, it would be good political theater to watch them self-destruct, and that's what they're doing, if there were not so much at stake. The economic consequences of a government shutdown are deadly serious. And, Mr. President, even today, when I had my news briefing, the Republicans are openly fighting against each other now. The few Senate Republicans are here and saying, well, we know we don't have enough votes to get rid of Obamacare, but let's send it back to the House and let them hang tough. House Republicans are saying, why isn't the Senate doing it? The Senate Republicans doing it themselves. So, Mr. President, the consequences of a government shutdown are deadly serious. The economic consequences of first ever default on the full faith and credit of the United States, deadly serious. Look what happened last time they threatened this. Stock market dropped 2,000 points. We lost our credit rating. It dropped. Now, Mr. President, anyone listening to this, don't take my word for it. The United States Chamber of Commerce, not noted for being this base of liberality in the country, wrote to members of the House yesterday saying, prevent a shutdown, ease the fears of default. And specifically, here's what they said, quote, it's not in the best interest of the United States or its business community or the American people to risk even a brief government shutdown that might trigger disruptive consequences or raise new policy uncertainties washing over the U.S. economy. The quote continues, likewise, the U.S. Chamber respectfully urges the House of Representatives to raise the debt ceiling in a timely manner and thus eliminate any question of threat to the full faith and credit of the United States. But, Mr. President, in spite of these warnings from the largest business organization in the country, Republicans either don't realize the stakes or simply don't care. They're willing to put the nation's economic recovery at risk to make an ideological point. What remains to be seen is how many innocent Americans will be hurt by their reckless political games. How many children will go to school without breakfast? How many workers will lose their jobs? How many seniors will lose their retirement? And how many businesses will lose their hard-earned investments if Republicans tank the economy? I only hope that the anarchists in the House of Representatives come to their senses before it's too late. I note the absence of quorum, Mr. President.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander.
Republican leader.
I ask consent that the quorum call be dispensed with.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that the Senate proceed to the immediate consideration of calendar number 191, S-1514, the Saving Coal Jobs Act. I ask unanimous consent that the bill be read a third time and passed without intervening action or debate, and the motion to reconsider be laid on the table.
Is there objection?
Mr. President, reserving the right to object. I know how important coal is to the state of Kentucky, West Virginia, Indiana. A lot of states feel very strongly about coal. And I will be happy to work with the Republican leader and others who are concerned about the coal issue in the United States to come up with a procedure where we can try to figure out a way to get a vote on this and have a reasonable debate on it. So I'll be happy to work with the Republican leader on this, but based on my brief review of this, I think it's best now for me to object, and I do object.
Mr. President, I might just say we have a genuine emergency in Kentucky, a depression in eastern Kentucky as a result of what this administration has done and is about to further do this very week, directed at the jobs and livelihood of my constituents. So it is for us a genuine emergency. The EPA is due this week to announce regulations capping carbon emissions on new coal-fired power plants. It's just the latest administration salvo in its never-ending war on coal, a war against the very people who provide power and energy for our country. The EPA has already stifled the permitting process for new coal mines. The agency has done this so dramatically that they have effectively shut down many coal mines through illegitimate, dilatory tactics. The EPA's actions ignore the thousands of people in my home state of Kentucky who depend on the coal industry for their livelihoods. Kentucky's own Jimmy Rose, a veteran and former coal miner, said it best in the title to his song, "Coal Keeps the Lights On." Coal keeps the lights on. In the year President Obama took office, there were 18,600 employed in the coal industry in my state. 18,600 Kentuckians were employed in the coal industry in my state the year President Obama took office. But as of September 2013, this month, the number of persons employed at Kentucky coal mines is down to 13,000. That's 18,600 when the President took office, 13,000 today employed in coal mines in my state. And the picture is actually getting worse instead of better. This week, a major employer announced 525 layoffs in eastern Kentucky mines. This news, ironically, came out on the same day the President announced that his proposals, according to him anyway, are helping to strengthen the economy. Try and tell that. Try and tell that to the hardworking coal miners in eastern Kentucky, that this is a way to strengthen the economy. These people are now trying to figure out how to feed their families and how to pay their bills. Well, Kentucky coal miners have suffered far too much already. Congress cannot idly sit by and let the EPA unilaterally destroy a vital source of energy and a vital source of employment. So that is the reason that I sought a few moments ago to bring up and pass the Coal Savings Jobs Act. Saving coal jobs is the single most important thing we could accomplish in the near term for the people of Kentucky. It is a combination of two bills, both of which have languished in committee for literally months. The bill would essentially repeal the administration's declaration of war against coal. The first part of the bill would prevent the EPA from regulating carbon on new and existing coal plants. The second would force the EPA to stop stalling on mining permits. Mr. President, it's time to act on the Saving Coal Jobs Act. The time to act is now. This is a genuine emergency in the Commonwealth of Kentucky.
The previous order, the leadership time is reserved. Under the previous order, the Senate will be in a period of morning business for 1 hour, with senators permitted to speak therein for up to 10 minutes each, with the time equally divided and controlled by the two leaders or their designees, with the majority controlling the first half.
Mr. President.
Senator from Arkansas.
Mr. President, I rise today to talk about the Farm Bill. 10 days. That's all the time we have to work out some agreement on our farm legislation before we revert back to the 1949 farm policy in this country. And let me just make this very clear to the American people and to my colleagues that this has nothing to do with the traditional battle lines in agriculture. This is not one of those Midwest farming versus Southern farming type things. This is not a specialty crop versus a row crop type issue. That has nothing to do with that at all. What this is an ideological fight where we see hyper-partisanship and gridlock politics taking over the Congress. Today, the House of Representatives has a vote. It's a very important vote. What they are proposing is that they cut $40 billion from the nutrition title over 10 years. That's $40 billion. Here again, this is not about a traditional fight that you see and you've seen for decades in agriculture here. This is about hunger in America. It is a sad fact. It's something that maybe people in this building don't like to acknowledge. The Mr. President, we have people who are hungry in this country. They may be people that we go to church with. They may be our neighbors. They may be friends, co-workers, folks who graduate from high school with. They could be seniors or children or the working poor. But we have people in this country who are hungry today. Can you imagine America being the land of plenty and having hungry people and having folks in this building, in the House of Representatives chamber, voting to not lend a helping hand when people need it the most? Mr. President, I'm reminded of that great song, America the Beautiful, where it starts out, "Oh, beautiful for spacious skies, for amber waves of grain, for purple mountains' majesties above the fruited plain." And it goes on and on and on to talk about the riches of this great country. But unfortunately, like I said today, we have way too much hunger in our nation, and the Congress can do something about that. The Congress can do something about it. In fact, the Senate already has done something about it. Thanks to Senator Stabenow and Senator Cochran and the bipartisan effort on the Senate Agriculture Committee, they made responsible reforms in the SNAP program and other nutrition programs to streamline and fix and correct and improve the nutrition title. And, you know, they went after the things that we're concerned about, things like waste and things like abuse of the system and fraud. And we all know that you have some of that in these programs. But, you know, we have a saying in our state, Mr. President, it's kind of a country saying. I know people heard it before, but they say, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Well, our agriculture law in this country ain't broke. Now, it can be improved, and I think that's what the Senate's done. The Senate's been responsible. The Senate's worked in a bipartisan way. Again, that bill passed through this chamber a few months ago with 66 votes, a very bipartisan vote. And that's the solution here. That's the solution of us working together. Unfortunately, we have, again, people down the hall in the House of Representatives who are going to put that at jeopardy with a my way or the highway political solution. And this is not good for the country. I think the reason some of these folks are doing this is because they don't understand the impact that their decision could have on this country. But let me put it in perspective. If you look at America, there's lots of different ways that you can look at agriculture and look at our economy and look at the global economy. But one way is this, is that we have several core strengths in the U.S. economy. We do some things here better than anybody else in the world. And one of those that we do best of all is agriculture. If you look at investment, if you look at innovation, if you look at new farming practices and ways to conserve water, how to get more per acre, all these things that improve and increase production and nutrition, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, they come here from America. It's one of the core strengths in the U.S. economy. Everybody in the world wants to be like America when it comes to agriculture. Everybody wants what we have. They copy us. They model what they do after this country. It's something we should be proud of. I know inside the Beltway it's not very exciting. It's not very flashy. But we have the safest and highest quality and in relative terms the cheapest food supply in the entire world. It's one of the true reasons for America's strength. But unfortunately, if we don't pass the Farm Bill, a new Farm Bill, by September 30th, we run the risk of putting all that in jeopardy. And there could be dire consequences. There's no question about it. You talk to all the experts, talk to all the economists, talk to the people who understand this, that what you can see here very clearly is that crop prices will destabilize. And that means some prices will go up, some will go down. For example, soybean farmers all over this country, they're going to lose their crop support. They're going to lose that protection that's been there since the 1960s. But because it wasn't there in 1949, it'll be gone. And that'll be devastating to the soybean industry. That's just one little piece of the puzzle. We could go on and on. But when you talk about we have a huge trade deficit in this country, we know that. But our saving grace when it comes to trade is agriculture. Those export programs to try to market and try to export our ag commodities and our ag products overseas will be lost if this agreement is not reached. Again, fruit prices will rise dramatically. We've heard others talk about it even this morning. The Democratic leader mentioned it. But it's going to hurt not only farmers, it's going to hurt families all over this country. And you know, Mr. President, this is personal to me. I know in your home state of Hawaii, you have a huge agriculture sector. I know it's very important to your state. Everybody thinks of how beautiful Hawaii is and tourism and all that, but agriculture is critically important to your economy, just like it is for the other 49 states. And almost every state, maybe with one or two exceptions, agriculture is very, very critical to that state's economy. That's true for Arkansas. And again, this is very personal for me. 1 in 6 jobs in our state are related directly or indirectly to agriculture. Agriculture, we love our Fortune 500 companies. We love having them. We have several that are based in Arkansas. We're proud of them. But 25% of our state's economy is tied to agriculture. 25%. So the question is, how do we fix this? And it's really something that you'll never hear on the talk shows. You won't hear the talking heads chatter on about this. But the way you fix this is to work in a bipartisan way, to come together, to be very responsible, just as the Senate has been on this issue, to be very responsible, to put something together and to get it done. This is why groups in my state like the Arkansas Farm Bureau, Agriculture Council of Arkansas, Riceland Foods, Arkansas Rice Producers Association, Tyson Foods, the Arkansas Cattlemen's Association, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and the list goes on. They've all supported what we did in the Senate, and they don't support what's going on in the House right now. But even more important than the groups, Mr. President, I've been around my state, of course, all year and all for the last 10 years, but in August recess, I went around the state, and every time I saw a farmer, and I literally talked to hundreds of them, they said, please, please, don't let this happen. Don't let this happen. Why do we want to put all this at risk? What we have now is working. Sure, we can make improvements. Yes, we support the Senate bill. Even though the Senate bill is not perfect, we support that because we know how important agriculture is. So, Mr. President, I would ask my House colleagues to please get themselves out of this manufactured crisis that they've created for us all. Let's turn off the politics. Let's work together. The American people are counting on us. Mr. President, with that, I yield the floor. And I suggest the...
Mr. President,
This is the Majority Leader.
are we in morning business at this moment?
We are.
And does the majority have the control until for an additional period of time?
Yes.
And how much time is remaining?
20.5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Mr. President, the news out of Washington is not encouraging. It looks like we're facing a government shutdown and the possibility of even a default on the debt ceiling. These are totally unnecessary. There is nothing that is forcing this other than the political will of some people. And both are disastrous. Shutting down the government, of course, runs the risk of disrupting Social Security payments, veterans' checks. It, of course, is damaging to our economy at a time when we're recovering but slowly, and we need to create jobs. It just doesn't make any sense. We're facing a deadline, obviously, of October 1st for a new fiscal year. We passed a budget in the Senate here back in the end of March, if I remember correctly. Senator Patty Murray of Washington, chairman of the Senate Budget Committee, worked through a budget that passed, and we then asked for the obvious. Let's have a meeting with the House. They're controlled by Republicans. We have a Democratic majority here. Why don't we just sit down now and work out our differences? The differences between the two budgets, about $92 billion, substantial for sure, but something that's at least worth sitting down and discussing. We came to the floor of the Senate repeatedly asking for a chance to sit down and work it out. And sadly, 3 or 4 senators on the other side of the aisle continued to object. They wouldn't let us sit down and talk. They wouldn't let us try to find a bipartisan solution to this challenge. And it brings us to this moment. not having agreed on a budget resolution, we've been unable to pass appropriation bills, though they're ready, in the United States Senate. I know a little bit about this because my new responsibility in the Appropriations Committee is the largest single bill. The bill that I have worked on with Senator Cochran, Republican of Mississippi, is a bill that covers all of the Defense Department and all of the intelligence agencies. And I will tell you, it is the largest and a huge portion of our national discretionary budget, almost 60%. We're ready. We've prepared the bill. We want to bring this bill before the committee and the floor and have the debate that it deserves so that our men and women in uniform are well served, our intelligence operations continue, and we acquire those things that are necessary for the protection of America. Unfortunately, the same group that opposed sitting down with the House Republicans and finding a compromise have objected to taking up any spending bill on the floor of the Senate. And so where does that leave us? We have no budget, and we can't take up a single spending bill because of the objections from the other side of the aisle. They're being guided by a few members over there who are of a certain political faith that I can't even describe, who believe that chaos is the best thing. I don't. I've been here for a little while. I found good faith efforts by members on both sides of the aisle. Many Republican senators, conservative, yes, but sensible, are willing to sit down and try to find answers to these issues. That's the right thing. Sadly, what's happened over in the House is hard to explain. I read press reports. There are about 40 of the House Republicans who are so-called Tea Party Republicans who insist on shutting down the government and insist as well on defaulting on our national debt. They happen to believe that that's a good way to push their position opposing health care reform, Obamacare. They happen to believe that's the way to convince the American people that they're right. I think they're completely wrong. I never thought I would ever come to the floor of the United States Senate to quote Karl Rove. But this morning's Wall Street Journal, for goodness sakes, he writes a long article to his fellow Republicans saying, wake up to reality. Independent voters, those who don't declare for either political party across America, think that the Tea Party Republican strategy is disastrous. And he warned the Republican Party, if you're not careful, you're going to push those independents over on the Democratic side. Now, far be it from me to not want to see that happen politically, but I certainly have to tell you that if it takes shutting down the government and shutting down the economy, I don't want it to happen. So what Karl Rove has said to his fellow Republicans is look at the reality of what you are doing to this party. You are destroying this party for the next election. This morning's Wall Street Journal. I ask unanimous consent that that article be placed in the congressional record at the conclusion of my remarks. Mr. President, most people don't even understand what a debt ceiling is. It's kind of hard, the average American, to understand. Let me try to put it in simple terms. We spend more money than we raise in taxes. When we do that, we have to borrow money. The good news is the amount each year is coming down dramatically so that our annual deficits are really reducing, are coming down. But when there is a difference, when you spend more than you have to borrow it, and in order to borrow it, there needs to be an overall authorization of the government to borrow. It's called the debt ceiling. So as we, for example, fund our military and borrow, say, 40% or 30% of what it takes to fund our military, as we borrow that, we need an authorization to do it. Now, there comes a point where we've used up all our authority to borrow, and we have to increase our authority to borrow, lift the debt ceiling to cover our new debt for money already spent, money spent by Congress. So now we have a position being taken by some Tea Party Republicans who may have voted for the spending, but now do not want to vote for the borrowing. You can't have it both ways. What happens if we don't increase the debt ceiling? Well, what it means is that for the first time in the history of the United States of America, we will default on our national debt. First time. What does a default mean? Families understand this and business understands this. If you don't pay your debts as you're supposed to, bad things can happen. Foreclosure, legal proceedings. But at a minimum, it destroys your credibility as a borrower, as a creditor. And when your credibility as a borrower goes down, what happens? Interest rates go up for you. Now translate that to America. If we default on our debt, if we fail to raise the debt ceiling, for the first time in the history of the United States, interest rates go up. The dollars paid by American taxpayers to build roads, educate children, defend the United States are diminished because we have to pay more and more for interest on the money that we borrow. Can we avoid this? Of course we can. This is a self-imposed problem, a problem that has been imposed by the Tea Party Republicans on the Congress and on the nation that is totally, totally unnecessary. Let me say a word, too, about the underlying issue of Obamacare. It's been almost a little over 3 years now since we passed Obamacare. The Supreme Court took up the bill, found it constitutional. It's underway. Certain provisions of this bill are already underway. And the goal of it, of course, is to deal with the cost of health care and the availability of health insurance in America. This is important to individuals and families and businesses. It's also important to our government. 60% of our national deficit, 60% of our national debt projected for the next 5 or 10 years is associated with the cost of health care. We buy a lot of health care as a federal government. Medicare for the elderly and disabled. Medicaid for those who are low income. Veterans to make certain that we keep our promise to them for good medical care. Indian health care, a variety of others. So as health care costs go up, the costs of the government go up, and they squeeze out all other spending. Spending on things like medical research, things like education, helping students have the money they need to go to college. So when we talk about Affordable Care Act and Obamacare, we are talking about dealing with a health care issue that directly impacts the debt of the United States of America. So we passed this bill to try to start to reduce the cost of health insurance and to make health insurance more available. And we changed some critical things about health insurance. Does anyone here, following this debate, know of a person with a pre-existing condition? Somebody in your family who maybe has high blood pressure, high cholesterol, asthma, diabetes, a history of cancer? All of those things can disqualify you, or could before this bill passed, from even having health insurance. We said that's the end of it. Health insurance companies have to take everybody. Everybody. You cannot exclude a person for a pre-existing condition. Take them all. Don't cherry pick the healthy people. Take them all. The second thing we said was, don't put a limit on the amount of money that a health insurance policy will pay, for obvious reasons. You go to the doctor tomorrow, some member of your family gets a terrible diagnosis of need for cancer treatment, and the bills just start stacking up. If your health insurance policy has a cap or a limit of, say, $50,000 or $100,000, when you reach that limit, there goes all your savings. You're finished. So we eliminate the limits on coverage in health insurance policies. That's Obamacare. And when the Republicans come to the floor and say we want to abolish Obamacare, they are abolishing these protections in health insurance. They are abolishing the provision which says you can't discriminate because of pre-existing conditions. They are abolishing the provision which says there can't be limits on your coverage. They're abolishing the provisions that say 80% of the premiums you pay have to be used by the health insurance company to pay for medical care, not for profit-taking, not for advertising, but for actual medical care. And there's more. Parents who are raising children who are going to college today, I went through that, my wife and I did, with our kids. How many times are you going to ask that young person just graduating from college, Jennifer, do you have your health insurance? Have you bought any health insurance? And have them tell you, Dad, I feel fine. Well, let me tell you as a parent, that isn't a good answer. But many students graduating from college who can't find a job or a full-time job don't have health insurance. The Affordable Care Act, Obamacare, says that families can keep those young people on their own health insurance plan until they reach the age of 26. Across America, over 1 million young people now have protection because of that. Also, in Affordable Care and the Health Care Reform Act, we'd start reducing the out-of-pocket cost of prescription drugs for seniors under Medicare. Medicare Prescription Part D is the right thing to do, but there was a so-called donut hole, this period where seniors had to pay out of their pockets. We started closing that donut hole to make sure that seniors didn't lose their precious savings to buy the medicine they needed to stay healthy and independent and strong. So when the Republicans say we want to abolish Obamacare and health care reform, they want to abolish this provision that will allow families to continue to cover their young people, their kids, until the age of 26. And they want to abolish the provisions which say, basically, that those who are receiving Medicare Prescription Part D will pay less out of pocket. Those are just 4 or 5 of the things that are part of Obamacare. The central part of it, which starts October 1st, and I think this is what makes some politicians on the Hill especially nervous, October 1st, they will advertise across America the insurance exchanges. What's an insurance exchange? It is an opportunity for people to buy health insurance. Many of them have never, ever in their lives been able to shop for health insurance. Now they can. And if they're low-income families, they may not have to pay a premium or a reduced premium under these insurance exchanges. Well, are these insurance exchanges reliable, trustworthy? Can we count on them? We better, because we put in the law that members of Congress now have to buy their insurance on these very same health insurance exchanges. What's good for America should be good for members of Congress. In my state, there'll be at least a half a dozen plans to choose from. In a state like California, when they announced their exchanges, they announced a reduction in premiums that people had to pay under those exchanges. That's what we're looking for. Competition, opportunity. People can make their choice if they wish to go in the exchanges. Members of Congress and our staff people don't have that choice. We're in them, and that's fine. I think it's going to be good health insurance. I have no question that it will be in my state of Illinois. But to eliminate Obamacare is to eliminate these health insurance exchanges, which means a lot of people desperate for health insurance for the first time in their lives, health insurance that they can afford, will not be able to do so. I don't think the bill we passed, Obamacare, health care reform, is a perfect bill. There's hardly anything that we do here that's perfect or even close. And I think it could be changed for the better. I'm open to that. I hope that members on both sides are. But that's not the way it works here. In the House of Representatives, they voted 41 times to destroy and eliminate Obamacare. 41 times. The Republican leader, Mr. Cantor of Virginia, offered one change in Obamacare that he thought made it better. His own party turned on him and said, no, we don't want to improve this bill. We want it to go down in flames. We don't want this law to go forward. It's not a positive view. A positive view is to take this measure, improve it where we can, and work to make it part of America's future. Like Social Security, like Medicare, like Medicaid, these are programs which are critically important to millions of Americans. I'm sorry that we're facing this showdown. What I hope will happen in the Senate is this. I hope the United States Senate doesn't go under cruise control following what we've seen from the House Republican caucus. This notion of doomsday scenarios and high noon scenarios and shutting down the government and shutting down the economy. I hope that there will be reasonable, conservative Republicans who will stand up and say that is unacceptable. We are going to sit down and in good faith bargain with the Democrats in the Senate to resolve whatever differences we can, but not to damage our government or our economy at this important moment in our history. That kind of courage will be rewarded. It may not be popular with some of the talking heads or screaming heads in these shows on television, but the American people are looking for that kind of leadership on both sides of the aisle. They do not accept the notion that shutting down the government and shutting down the economy is the best way to solve our political problems. The approval rating of Congress now is about 11%. I'm surprised many days that it's even that high. I didn't know we had so many relatives and people on the payroll. But 11%. We can do better if we face our problems and challenges honestly and deal with them in a way that doesn't hurt innocent people and families across America. Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from Georgia.
Mr. President, September is National Suicide Prevention Month. And I think as a member of the Veterans Committee, as an American, as a member of the United States Senate, it's important for us to pause for a minute and recognize some alarming facts about suicide in America among our veterans. On average, every day, 365 days a year, 22 veterans that have served America take their own life in suicide. That's 8,000 veterans a year, an alarming number that is growing. It is important for us to recognize the need to see to it our veterans have access to those things that can help to prevent suicide and make sure that it's minimized and happens as little as possible. Recent surveys by VSOs, the Veterans Service Organizations, have demonstrated that an alarming number of veterans in America, out of our 22 million, have actually considered suicide. And an even further alarming number actually know someone who attempted to take their life or, in fact, was successful. Now, we know there are reasons that can reach out and help us, and we know there are reasons that are hurting us. Some of the things that are hurting us right now are long lines for veterans in needs of mental health. Mental health needs are an emergency. They are not something that is not time sensitive, and we've got to improve our wait times so they're not as long at our VA hospitals. There is a nationwide shortage, both public and private, of mental health providers. We've got to work on seeing to it that we improve the number of providers for our entire country. Scarce appointment times for veterans because of their work or family opportunities and scarce appointment times because of overworked VA hospitals make it sometimes difficult and protracted for a veteran to receive services. Biggest of all to me is the gaps in the continuum of service and treatment to a veteran under mental stress and depression. And I want to focus on that for just a second. Recently, I held a VA field hearing in Atlanta, Georgia, because of the tragedy that took place at the Atlanta VA. We had 2 suicides of veterans under the care of the hospital and 1 overdose of drugs while someone was in the hospital and under the care of the hospital. Those brought about an Inspector General's report that made a plethora of recommendations to the Veterans Administration in Atlanta, but also nationwide, on things the VA needed to do to address those problems. To the credit of Director Petzel, who's head of all VA medical care, and Eric Shinseki, the Secretary of the Veterans Administration, the VA has begun taking initiatives to do so. But we've got to make sure they accelerate those initiatives and provide the care that is necessary so that wherever possible, we eliminate the wait times and the lack of continuum of care. In a recent survey by the Inspector General, they found that 20% of veterans, 1 in 5, who were referred to a private mental health provider, never got an appointment. Mr. President, that's 1 in every 5 veterans who have come in and admitted they have a problem. They may be at risk for taking their own life. They may be in depression. That is unsatisfactory. One of the focuses we made in our hearing was bringing about better coordination by the VA in terms of accessing community resources in mental health to see to it we raise the number of providers offering mental health services to our veterans. As I've said earlier in my remarks, suicide is preventable. It is not, however, preventable if there is no access to therapy, no access to consultation, and no access for our veterans when they need it the most. Now, let me brag a little bit about the VA and some of the things they've done in recent years that have helped and give you some amazing statistics. In 2007, the Veterans Crisis Line was conceived, where veterans in trouble for themselves can call in and receive counseling. More than 814,000 calls have been received by the Veterans Crisis Line since it opened, and 28,000 interventions have saved the lives of veterans. That's 28,000 veterans who are alive today because of the Crisis Line. In 2009, the VA added an anonymous online chat service where a veteran could have a non-threatening way of communicating and seeking therapy anonymously. And that has numbered 94,000 calls since its inception. And most impressive to me, in 2011, the Veterans Crisis Line added texting as a way to expand its accessibility to veterans. If you're a veteran in crisis, we need to make sure as American United States Senators and as members of the Veterans Committee that you have the access you need to the therapy and the counseling when you need it. We all know the tragedy of suicide is terrible on a family and a horrible loss of a life that was sacrificed on behalf of the United States of America. And we owe it to ourselves to see to it that the Veterans Administration continues to improve access to mental health services, continues to reduce the wait times and long lines, and continues to cooperate and reach out to the community to bring in private providers on a referral basis so that veterans in need of care get a referral and get an appointment quickly. My last point on that, too, Mr. President, it's important that the VA be sure they follow that veteran to see to it they keep that appointment. In the cases of suicides in the Atlanta VA, the failure to keep an appointment or the failure to have a continuum of care and following of that veteran substantially created and contributed to the loss of that life. So while we've had tragedies at the Atlanta VA, things are improving. While we've had tragedies in suicide across the country, we're finally focusing on veteran suicide. Lastly, we need to focus on the fact that there are many contributing factors to suicide. Many people will think it's someone returning from Iraqi freedom or enduring freedom. In some cases, that is true. But more often than not, veterans over 50 are the victims of suicide. In fact, of the ones in Atlanta, they were Vietnam-era veterans at the time. It's important we understand it's every veteran that's at risk. It's every veteran that needs access to treatment. We need to understand our veterans, we owe our veterans a big debt. Most importantly, a way to see to it they don't lose their life out of despair and depression, but their life is saved because our VA cares enough to see to it they have the continuum of care and the access to help that they so virtually need. So to the VA administration, thanks for the improvements they are making. To every member of the Senate, let's continue to support the Veterans Administration and the funding necessary to deal with the more than 1 million new veterans returning home because of the wars in the Middle East over the last decade. And I yield back the balance of my time and suggest the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander.
It's general speeches in the Senate this morning for another 5 minutes or so. The pending business is energy efficiency legislation to encourage business development. And then at 10:30, we do expect the Senate to take up that legislation this morning. While we wait for more action on the Senate floor, we'll go live now to Capitol Hill as the Senate Foreign Relations Committee is meeting today to hear from nominees to, among others, the ambassador to Japan, with testimony from former First Daughter Caroline Kennedy. She is the nominee to be the ambassador to Japan.
Our country, and I know that you're going to have to be a champion for our national interest and assuring the Japanese people that we are going to honor those commitments, and I know you're going to be willing to do that. And we still have the thorny issues, as you and I talked about in the office, regarding the relocation of the troops that we have there and some of the issues that internally the people of Japan have with us right now regarding that. But I know you're going to do that well. And, Mr. Chairman, I know we have a second panel that is coming. I'm going to go ahead and make my comments relative to them very briefly to save time. I know we have an ambassador's ambassador, if you will, coming up. Ann Patterson. I want to thank her for her wonderful public service also. She'll be looking after the areas of the Middle East and North Africa, and I don't know if we have a more qualified ambassador in our foreign service, and I know that she's going to have to develop a coherent, comprehensive strategy for how we deal with a lot of thorny issues, including and specifically Syria and Egypt. I think the American people are going to need to fully understand, you know, the importance of Syria to our country and what our national interests are there, and I know you'll articulate that well. In Egypt, while we might not like what the military has done in every way, we have a very important relationship with them, and I know you'll help lead us to a very good place there, keeping in mind that we have a lot of national interest. And I know that you'll help us figure out a way to balance our security interests, but also our interest in democracy and human rights. And to Greg, I appreciate you being here regarding the diplomatic piece. I was, as you know, in Libya right after the events of that time, and I know our diplomatic posts are very much at risk around the world. I thank you for your commitment in that regard. I know that what happened in Iraq was heroic in many ways and shows the best of our diplomatic security. At the same time, there's a lot of money that's flowing into Afghanistan and Iraq, and that's not the case in many other places. And I know that you will attack this job with great fervor. So I thank all three of you for offering yourself in this way. I look forward to your comments and questions, and certainly look forward to your service.
Thank you, Senator Corker, and I'll have some comments to make about our other nominees when I introduce them before the full committee. Ms. Kennedy, it's now an opportunity for you to make a statement before the committee. Your full statement will be included in the record without objection, and the floor is yours.
Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Corker, members of the committee, Senator Schumer, Senator Gillibrand, it's an honor to appear before you this morning as the President's nominee to serve as the United States Ambassador to Japan. I appreciate the confidence that President Obama and Secretary Kerry have shown in nominating me for this important position, and I'm grateful for the consideration of this distinguished committee. I appreciate the opportunity to be here today to answer your questions and hear firsthand your thoughts and concerns about our essential relationship with Japan. If confirmed, I look forward to working with the committee and with other members of Congress to advance the interests of the United States, protect the safety of our citizens, and strengthen the bilateral relationship for the benefit of both our countries. I would also like to thank my family for their support throughout this process and their enthusiasm for this mission. My husband Ed is here along with two of my three children, my daughter Tatiana and my son Jack, and I'm so pleased that my Aunt Vicki could be here this morning as well. She carries with her every day the spirit of my Uncle Teddy, whose devotion to this institution, to his colleagues, and our country was an inspiration to all of us. I'm humbled to be following in the footsteps of some of Congress's most distinguished members, Senator Mansfield, Vice President Mondale, Speaker Foley, and Senator Baker. If confirmed, I will try every day to live up to the standard they set in representing the United States and advancing our relationship with Japan. I am also grateful to Ambassador Tom Schiefer and especially to Ambassador John Roos and Susie Roos for their generous advice